Man saved pennies for 45 years. Then he cashed them. Their total is astounding. Today Anders, who is now 70, first began collecting pennies he found on the ground a little more than 45 years ago. He told the reporters that he was certain that every time he discovered a dime on the ground, it was a sign from God telling him to always be grateful. Anders acknowledged that he occasionally skipped prayer, and those days tended to coincide with times when he'd come across a penny. Even though he knew there was hope and a reason to pray for years, he nonetheless saved all the pennies in his Ruston home. In 2015, he realized that his homeowner's insurance would not protect his pennies in the event of a break-in or a fire in his house. He finally decided after many years to take his load of pennies to the bank. Anders spent the majority of his life working for the Jackson School District as a supervisor responsible for looking after pupils who had been suspended from school. He saved pennies, and the pupils he worked with saved pennies and brought them to school because they knew he was a penny saver. Anders would buy the pennies from the kids since he wouldn't just take the pennies from them. The only people he ever accepted pennies from unpaid were his wife and children, and even then only occasionally. He had someone else helping him with his penny money, so he wanted to either find them or buy them. He had a friend named Jack. Jack was saving nickels and Anders was saving pennies. Each time Jack found a penny, he'd give it to Anders. Each time Anders found a nickel, he'd give it to Jack. When one of them found coins for the other, there was no paying each other back. They had what they called an exchange program. Each man would often try to outdo the other by building up their collections. When Anders would visit somebody's home he had no problem keeping the penny. He would tell the homeowner if he found a quarter or a dime. If he found either of those he would return it to the homeowner and then let them know that if it has been a penny it would have gone into his pocket. He'd also hold on to a nickel and tell the homeowner, so that he could continue his exchange program with his friend. He was so serious about saving his pennies that he stopped spending pennies altogether. He didn't spend a single penny even if he had to. If he purchased something for $2.06, he'd give the cashier $2 and a dime, rather than spending some of his pennies. He figured that was the best way to save as many pennies as possible. In the 1970s, when there was a shortage of pennies, the United States government offered $25 for every $100 in pennies that were handed in. Anders could have easily cashed out his pennies that way, but he didn't. He chose to hold on to his collection and continue saving. This was before Coinstar was invented, which makes it easy to cash in change without needing to roll it nowadays. His penny collection was his pride and joy, and he wanted to continue saving even if the U.S. government was giving him an easy way to cash in on his fortune. When Anders decided that it was finally time to cash in his load of pennies, getting them to the bank was not an easy task. The pennies weighed an astonishing 2,800 pounds. This was way too big for him to bring to the bank on his own. To put that number into perspective, his penny load weighed about as much as the average American bison. When Anders got his 15 water bottles full of pennies to the bank, he then had to figure out how to get the pennies out quickly and easily. Anders decided that the best way to do that would be to taking an axe to the containers to break them and get the pennies out. When they got the pennies out of the containers, they still needed to be counted. To make things as easy as possible, automatic counting machines needed to be used. Had they tried to count the 2,800 pounds of pennies by hand, it would have taken far too long. The containers were broken into plastic buckets and then they poured the pennies into the counting machine. Even with automatic counters, it took over 5 hours for the bankers to count the pennies. The bank staff had to switch out the coin bags every 20 minutes, because each one only held about $50. When the pennies were finally done being counted, The moment of truth came. Anders was so excited to find out how much money he had after 45 years of saving pennies. The total came out to $513,640, over $500,000. This averages out to 31 pennies per day over the course of 16,425 days. According to Anders, if he wasn't worried that his homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover the pennies, he'd probably still be saving them today rather than cashing them in.